Welcome to Forthright, and this is the first edition of Emails to the Author, following up on a column previously published in the Spokesman Review. This column had a headline online of Healthy Boundaries, published Thursday, August 19th, 2021. The Boston Tea Party was not about tea. It was a political protest against perceived overreach by an out-of-touch monarch into the affairs of individuals without their consent. A small group decided they had been pushed one step too far and tangibly registered their objections by brewing a shipload's worth of tea in Boston Harbor. Likewise, the pushback on COVID-driven mandates is not primarily about mRNA vaccines. It's a Boston Tea Party moment, when an overbearing executive branch of government has pushed a significant number of public employees and healthcare professionals one step too far. This column is not going to attempt to state the evidence for or against any individual vaccination decision. There are clearly benefits to the community and risks to individuals, as there are in so many individual choices. My personal choice was to seek out mRNA vaccination, a decision made after careful consideration. While I am happy to provide information, I will not attempt to shame or argue others into making the same choice. And I don't want the government threatening public servants and healthcare workers on my behalf with loss of livelihood and profession if they don't allow that most personal of boundaries, their skin, to be penetrated by government edict. The right to bodily privacy discovered in the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution by the Supreme Court in the Roe v. Wade decision surely applies. As I've made clear in columns on the pro-abortion versus pro-life debate, I don't want to see abortion prohibited by legislation, but to apply the same right to bodily privacy to both the unborn child and the mother. That's an issue on which I draw a line, recognizing it means dealing with the ethically fraught conflict between the interests of the unborn child and his or her mother while respecting the autonomy of both. We empower legislators to debate and pass laws within constitutional boundaries, which may require or restrict actions by individuals in the name of community good. Driving on the right side of the road, using your headlights after dark, prohibiting drinking and driving, mandatory motorcycle helmets in some states, but not others, where communities have judged individual freedom outweighs community benefit or pressure from insurance companies. Some decisions we leave to individuals in the name of freedom. The greatest quantity of negative emails I have ever received following a column was triggered by suggesting bicyclists should wear something reflective at night to better avoid collisions with cars. You would have thought I was mandating a scarlet letter S for smug. I had apparently crossed a boundary with a Sons of Liberty subset of commuting cyclists. Individuals are free to choose many risky behaviors having community consequences. According to the CDC, as reported by CNBC News, nearly 80% of those who have been hospitalized, needed a ventilator, or died from COVID-19 have been overweight or obese. Over 42% of the U.S. population was considered obese in 2018. Not merely overweight with a body mass index of 25 to 30, but obese with a BMI of more than 30. The well-researched route to drastically reduce the severity of illness due to COVID and to avoid overtaxing hospital systems would be to reduce all Americans' BMI to less than 30. Instead of wagging fingers at strangers for not wearing masks, civic busybodies could eye the line at the bakery and say, "Sorry, ma'am, no donuts for you." Since we're still calling it an emergency, we could resurrect World War II-era food ration cards. And company picnics would sure be fun, with HR enforcers insisting, "Put down that second hamburger or you're fired." Bonus benefits would include reduced strain on our healthcare system due to other obesity-related health impacts, making the community healthier as a whole and increasing our community resilience to new virus variants. Obesity is linked to poverty and lack of access to healthy foods, an equity issue. Instead of issuing EBT cards to people living in urban and rural food deserts, sign folks up for the meal prep kit subscriptions that provide healthy foods and an appropriate number of calories each day, perhaps with a one-size-fits-all menu dictated by experts. Would any of those mandates cross your boundary? Or do individuals have the right and the responsibility to decide what goes into their bodies based on all of the available evidence, their sincerely held beliefs, and their individual health concerns. Requirements to be fully vaccinated for SARS-CoV-2 by October 18th or be terminated from their jobs pits the interests of individuals in determining their personal risk against the interest of the community in mitigating overall risk. King Inslee has been operating under executive edict in a state of emergency for 18 months, unchecked by the legislature. Instead of meeting in a Boston tavern, over 17,600 people are meeting on a Facebook group called Washington State Citizens Against the mRNA Injection Mandate and reassuring each other they are not alone in rejecting forced vaccination, even if it means losing their jobs. Where do you draw the line? What government mandate would be a step too far for you? Responses to that column ran about evenly pro and con. Naysayers zeroed in on vaccines and went straight to, people will die, it will be all your fault for not demanding vaccination. Like this gentleman. I have 2 very young grandchildren who cannot get vaccinated yet. They will as soon as it is allowed. In the meantime, people whose freedom is being threatened are endangering them. Rhetoric like yours only served to inflame them. They were all vaccinated against polio and smallpox, which were less threatening to people than this vaccine. You need to get educated about the real consequences of this virus and quit with the freedom nonsense. So his remarks shaped what became a template for responding. You missed my point, John. Although this has become such an emotional topic, I rather expected that reaction would not be uncommon. I'm not going to engage in arguments over the long-term and short-term effectiveness of mRNA vaccines, individual risk, and community benefit. I've made it clear what my decision on vaccination has been, and I'm certain if SARS-CoV-2 was as contagious as chickenpox, which it isn't, and as deadly as smallpox, which it isn't, most people currently reluctant to accept vaccination would make a different risk-benefit analysis. The question remains, what mandate from the government would you reject? Where is your boundary between individual liberty and submitting to authority in the name of protecting the community from some perceived harm? And then there were those who were triggered by referring to our governor as King Inslee, a nickname that has been bandied about for well over a year, like this critic. I take it from your characterization of the governor as a king that you do not think he should assume emergency powers, or at least for not as long as he has, without some sort of legislative authorization. Theoretically, I agree with you, but it's exceedingly difficult for the legislature to craft legislation that addresses a moving target, which the fight against COVID most certainly is. What the defenders of King Inslee continuing to govern by mandate fail to see is how regular consultation with the legislature was a missed opportunity to build unity. Not just talking to a few members of his own party, but an inclusive outreach to legislators representing diverse points of view across the state. It's entirely possible all the same decisions would have been made, but they would have had a broad base of support, and we really would all be in this together. I always answer emails from readers, if only to thank them for taking time to send feedback. But what I really enjoy is when that feedback turns into a civil conversation. That provides a glimmer of hope for the country. So this email from a reader began what turned into a longer and satisfying conversation. She writes, I enjoy reading your conservative commentaries in the review and sometimes even agree with you. However, today's article equating being overweight with not being vaccinated is missing the point. The vast majority of Americans are upset with those who refuse to get the COVID vaccine because they don't want the government telling them what to do, and they don't seem to care what their actions will, as a whole, lead to many, many more deaths of not only those close to them, but throughout society. It may also allow even more dangerous viruses to emerge. If not getting a vaccine only puts the person not getting the vaccine in danger, then there wouldn't be as much need for mandates. She goes on to add that those who are not getting vaccines are adding to society's cost of health care, insurance, and economic well-being, whereas an overweight person is in most cases only affecting their own economic situation. I'm sure you're aware of these costs to society due to people not getting a very effective and safe vaccine. You should write a commentary on the cost to society of individuals not getting vaccinated. But I could also write a commentary on the cost to society of people not taking care of their health in general. While I disagree on this with this reader's conclusions about the cost to society of obesity and unhealthy lifestyles, that's a debate for another day. We did go on to enjoy a civil discussion on how we should deal with individual choices when the consequences affect others, including taxpayers footing the bill for medical care. leading to her response to setting healthy boundaries between the individual and government. She goes on to say, "You ask a good question. When am I willing to accept government mandates? I would say when those mandates are keeping me from hurting others. My overeating will damage my health, but it won't affect anyone else's health or finances. I drink, but I don't drive after drinking. I know that dangers not only myself, but others. And finally, I am a follower of Christ, and He and the Holy Spirit give me compassion for the other. So I try to do what is good for the other, in particular the poor and the hurting of the world. A person who follows Christ will naturally want to keep others from getting sick from COVID and set aside their political views for the good of others. Why some don't is beyond me." She concludes with, "I pray for Americans to gain wisdom and compassion in all things." It turned out that we had common ground in Christ and a shared concern for the poor and marginalized in the world, even if we drew our boundaries in different places. Then there's the fan mail from people who feel intimidated by progressive narratives dominating media and thank me for speaking up on their behalf. These are the folks who picked up on the theme of individual autonomy and appreciated seeing an op-ed on that principle and on the scope of government. Like this writer who said, "Thank you for your article. Thank you for being bold enough to speak to the issue at hand and not just spew the standard line that all other journalists seem to be taking. Bodily autonomy is our last sovereign right and is definitely the line I have drawn in the sand. The beauty of this country is that we do have free choice to live our lives how we choose with all the attached consequences of those choices. I'm certain you may receive some backlash from this article." Yes, I did. "But for one, applaud you for looking at the bigger picture and embracing personal responsibility for guiding one's life. In a fairy tale world, everyone would make those wise decisions which have such profound effects on our health. It is a step too far that government feels the need to interject its opinion on how best to maintain health. The question is, how do we protect ourselves from those who think they know better and who do, in emergency orders, have the absolute power to enact those orders? Thank you for giving voice to many who feel the same, respectful of all choices people make." From another regular correspondent who thoughtfully raised some other issues, an argument could be made that becoming obese does not directly endanger others as transmission of COVID does, but maybe a stronger case could be made for alcohol consumption, which can and does endanger others if not better regulated. The issue that underlies all of these scenarios is why some things are high-profile national urgency while others are not. And that's an excellent question. We have to ask ourselves why some issues become major, become pressured, become subject to emergency powers, and some do not. My writer goes on to say, is it a social experiment being used to foster a basis for socialism replacing our republic? And why has this issue taken on narrative qualities where debate is seen as unpatriotic or stupid, statistics are provided after manipulation or not provided at all, and where legitimate questions are mocked or not allowed to be asked? Why is most of the media compliant in pushing the narrative? It is not just that many have been pushed one step too far. Some of us worry about why we are being pushed at all. What is happening here and why argues for possible carryover into many other facets of our lives, and that is really scary. It was a column about boundaries and setting those healthy boundaries, and we're seeing that argument play out right now. One of the plaintiffs in the lawsuit recently filed in Walla Walla County against the state over the vaccine mandates is a friend and neighbor. We may lose him and as many as 215 of his colleagues out of a Washington State Patrol workforce of 1,000 over a boundary pushed too far. I hope you've enjoyed this edition of Emails to the Author as much as I have. Reading some of the reactions that never make it to the letters to the editor will be a regular feature of Forthright. The emails on this column surpass the bicycle column. I knew discussing boundaries in the current fearful atmosphere would ruffle more than a few feathers, but that's what you get when you speak forthrightly.